Good evening, live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Live, India's voice to the world. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, coming up in the next 30 minutes. UK Supreme Court rules legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex, says law still gives protection against discrimination to transgender people. US President Donald Trump orders tariff probe on all US critical mineral imports amid national security concerns. Electronic goods, semiconductors, smartphone imports to bear the brunt. Ahead of second round of talks with United States, Iran says right to enrich uranium is not negotiable. United Kingdom's Supreme Court has ruled that legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. The UK court on Wednesday upheld an appeal by Campaign Group on whether transgender women are legally women under equality legislation, ruling that the law referred to a biological woman and biological sex. The court added that the act also protected transgender people against discrimination. However, the transgender campaigner said that excluding them could lead to discrimination, especially over employment issues.
The terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex. But we counsel against reading this judgment as a triumph of one or more groups in our society at the expense of another. It is not. In a win for Scottish gender-critical campaigners who brought the case to the UK's highest court, 5 London judges unanimously ruled that terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refers to biological woman and biological sex.
In Scotland specifically, I think what our politicians need to get their heads around is this is the law, and they need to stop pushing faulty guidance into schools and hospitals. And you know, I think there is going to be an ongoing fight, because we still have policies that now we know, we always knew that they were unlawful because they allowed self-ID, and we from our previous rulings we knew self-ID was not lawful. But now we have a really concrete basis on which to go forward.
And for more, DD India's Jessica Taneja joins us live from the newsroom. Jessica, could you simplify for us why is this case and the outcome important in the context of legal definition of a woman?
Right, this ruling is certainly important in a sense where you were seeing a lot of discourse related to gender, not just in the United Kingdom but also in the United States. And bearing in mind that this is the ruling from the highest court of the country, will have bearing and will of course be taken up as precedent for many other rulings to come in the future. But to understand as to what this ruling really means is boiling down to one fact, which is especially when we talk about, spaces which are shared by women and also trans women and other public services as well. So the legal definition of what really would define a woman, especially when it comes to the Equality Act of 2010, which refers to the services. So in that sense, the court ruling has made it clear that women who are born or assigned the gender at birth as women or biological sex would be recognized and would be given the kind of rights under the Equality Act, and not trans women. Trans women who have acquired a gender recognition certificate will not be included in this. So certainly a setback for a lot of trans activists as well as people of minority who were seeking some form of justice here, because as you see in the United Kingdom, it was a case that pertained to Scotland, and it started simply on the fact that there was a movement to increase the number of women on boards in public institutions across Scotland, and there the issue emerged whether women who are assigned the gender at birth, which is their biological sex, should be included with the women who are, given a gender recognition certificate, that is the trans women. So, that is where it all started, and perhaps the court has now made it clear, the UK Supreme Court has now made it clear that this is, in a sense, what it is going to be. And the kind of reactions we've seen pouring in right now, looking at the current government in the UK, which is the Labour Party, they seem to have said that the judgment now brings in clarity and confidence, whereas the opposition, which is the Conservative Tories and Kemi Pandok, seem to have suggested in her words that the clear victory, this is certainly a clear victory for common sense, which is what, on the basis of which this case was being fought in the Supreme Court of United Kingdom, and perhaps it has made it clear that only biological sex will be recognized under the Equality Act of 2010, which then extends to services as well as single sex spaces, along with changing rooms and other sports clubs as well.
Jessica, thank you for joining us with those details. Moving on, the Kremlin on Wednesday declined to specify when the 30-day moratorium on strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure would end, or whether it would be extended. This was just hours before the agreement was set to expire. Ukrainian Air Force launched 97 drones during overnight attacks. The Air Force said it shot down 57 drones, with another 34 not reaching their targets, likely due to electronic warfare countermeasures. Ukrainian officials said Russia's drone attack on the Black Sea port city of Odessa damaged residential buildings, warehouses and civilian infrastructure. Meanwhile, Ukraine's parliament has extended martial law until August, delaying the timing of new elections that the United States and Russia have been pushing for. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is headed to Paris for talks on ending the conflict in Ukraine. Rubio is traveling with US envoy Steve Witkoff for talks with European officials on advancing Trump's goal to end the conflict. US envoy Witkoff on Monday said Russian President Vladimir Putin sees a peace deal emerging. In other news, Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke to Finland's President Alexander Stubb. In a post on X, Prime Minister says he had a fruitful conversation with President Alexander Stubb. Prime Minister added that Finland is an important partner country in the EU and India is committed to elevate its ties with the bloc. Both leaders exchanged their perspectives on regional and global issues, including the situation in Ukraine. The leaders also reviewed the ongoing collaboration between the two countries, including in areas of digitalization, sustainability and mobility. They also reiterated their commitment to further strengthen and deepen partnership, including in areas of quantum, 5G, 6G, AI and cybersecurity. President Stubb expressed Finland's support for closer India-EU relations and conclusion of a mutually beneficial FTA at the earliest. The European Union on Wednesday published a list of 7 countries it considers safe in a bid to speed up migrant returns by making it harder for citizens of those nations to claim asylum in the bloc. The European Commission said it was proposing to designate Kosovo, Bangladesh, Colombia, Egypt, India, Morocco and Tunisia as safe countries of origin. The move is set to allow EU governments to process asylum application filed from citizens of those countries more quickly by introducing a presumption that such applications lack merit. EU candidate countries would also, in principle, meet the criteria to be designated as safe countries, exceptions being when they are hit by a conflict, the Commission said. US President Trump ordered a probe on Tuesday that may result in tariffs on critical minerals, rare earth metals and associated products such as smartphones in an escalation of the dispute with global trade partners. The order states that critical minerals and their derivatives are essential for US military and energy infrastructure, noting their use in jet engines, missile guidance systems and advanced computing, among others. Trump has upended markets in recent weeks with his sweeping on-off levies, and this investigation could see him impose further tariffs. It shows that imports of critical minerals and their derivatives endanger US national security. The imports targets include so-called critical minerals like cobalt, lithium, nickel, rare earth elements, as well as products that partly require these resources, such as electric vehicles and batteries. US President Trump confirmed on Truth Social platform that he will be holding talks on tariffs with Japan envoy on Wednesday. Many other nations will also hold talks with the United States. Meanwhile, China tells Trump to stop threatening and blackmailing as the country appointed its new international trade negotiator. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump's tariffs have got the nations scrambling to seek alternative strategies to offset the headwinds surging towards their respective economies. Global leaders are crisscrossing continents to further strengthen trade relations and forge new partnerships. China's President Xi Jinping is in Malaysia as part of his tour of Southeast Asia to further consolidate economic and trading ties with traditional trade allies. Earlier, China and Vietnam signed 45 cooperation agreements on, among other things, supply chains and artificial intelligence. Simultaneously, China is preparing for what could be challenging times ahead. On Wednesday, China appointed a new trade negotiator, Li Chenggan, who will be key in any talks over tariffs with the United States. President Trump has said that China's efforts to ramp up trade pacts with Asian economies were aimed to corner the United States. Even US allies, which have relied heavily on exports to Washington, are now keen to probe possibilities of new alliances. South Korea and Vietnam have agreed to raise their bilateral trade to $150 billion by 2030. Allies are also making a dash to Washington to seek a favorable trade deal with the United States. South Korea's Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok will meet his US counterpart Scott Bessent next week with an aim to delay imposition of reciprocal tariffs as much as possible. Tokyo's envoy has also left for Washington. He said that they are confident of a win-win outcome while protecting Japanese national interests. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo said that he was convinced that the United States and the European Union would negotiate a fair trade deal after meeting with US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Indonesian officials are also coming to Washington. They are expected to propose an increase in crude oil and liquefied petroleum gas imports from the United States by around $10 billion as part of its tariffs negotiations. Ayushi Bhatnagar's report, DD India.
Meanwhile, President Trump escalated his war against elite US universities with a threat to strip Harvard University's tax-exempt status if the country's educational establishment refuses to submit to wide-ranging government oversight. DD India's Harshita Oberoi gets us more.
The Trump administration has issued a stark ultimatum. Harvard must fall in line or risk losing its protected tax status. Trump posted on social media that Harvard should lose its tax-exempt status and be taxed as a political entity if it does not submit to the demands for the university to change the way it runs itself, including selection of students and authority for professors.
First, when it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear. They must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students.
The government froze more than $2 billion in federal research contracts and grants after President Alan Garber vowed to protect constitutional rights, declaring the university will not be taken over. Harvard has enlisted law firms, including Queen Emanuel, to defend its autonomy. The pressure campaign echoes a similar clash with Columbia University. After protests on campus, the administration cut $400 million in funding. Dozens of universities are separately battling the Trump administration in court over broad research funding cuts that have led to staff layoffs. Meanwhile, 3 law students have filed a lawsuit against the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, challenging its investigation into diversity, equity, and inclusion policies at 20 major US law firms. They claim the agency is unlawfully collecting personal data, weaponizing it under political orders. Harshita Oberoi's report for DD India.
Let's now turn to some other stories making news. Lyft, an online cab bike riding services, is set to expand into Europe with $198.4 million deal to acquire mobility platform Freenow from BMW and Mercedes-Benz. The move nearly doubles Lyft's market reach, opening access to major cities like London, Paris and Frankfurt, where Free Now offers services from taxis to e-scooters and car sharing. In South Africa, American pastor Josh Sullivan has been rescued unharmed after a dramatic shootout in Clickbera. The 45-year-old missionary from Tennessee was abducted at gunpoint during a prayer service last week. South Africa's elite police unit tracked him to a safe house where 3 suspects were killed during the operation. The mechanical horse Zeus, star of the Olympic opening ceremony, is on display for 2 weeks atop Marseille's museum, where costumes from the torchbearer and Marie Antoinette have also been added to the permanent collection. Still to come on this edition of DD India Live. Xi Jinping calls for advancing China-Malaysia relations. WHO nations reach landmark pandemic accord.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's landmark Sri Lanka visit. From defence cooperation to energy and digital connectivity. Many firsts enhancing bilateral ties. Buddhism and Ramayana. Cultural and historical links re-energized. Watch India-Sri Lanka Exemplary Neighbours tonight at 8:30 PM IST and 3 PM GMT. Only on DD India.
This week on Defense Dynamic, India and the United States wrap up Exercise Tiger Trump 2025 on India's east coast. India successfully tests its long-range glide bomb Gaurav. Can this homegrown weapon redefine precision strike capability and send a strong message across the border? What are direct energy weapons? Why, after successful trial of DRDO's DEW, India is now in the exclusive club? And inside the Indian Air Forces, how the Wolf Pack strategy is transforming aerial warfare, coordination and lethal intent. Tune in this Wednesday at 8 PM IST only on DD India.
You're watching DD India Live. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has said on Wednesday that Iran's right to enrich uranium is not negotiable. Iran's foreign minister, who will visit Russia on Thursday, made these comments ahead of the second round of talks in Italy this weekend with the United States.
What is certain is that Iran's enrichment is a real, accepted and factual matter, and we are prepared to build confidence regarding potential concerns, but the principle of enrichment is non-negotiable.
An earlier U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff said a diplomatic agreement with Iran will depend on working out the details around verification of the country's uranium enrichment and weapons program.
The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about 2 critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%.
In other news, Israeli troops will remain in the buffer zones that they have created in Gaza, even after any settlement to end the war. Defense Minister Israel Katz has said his efforts to revive a ceasefire agreement faltered. Since resuming their operation last month, Israeli forces have carved out a broad security zone extending deep into Gaza and squeezing more than 2 million Palestinians into ever smaller areas in the south and along the coastline. In southern Gaza alone, Israeli forces have seized about 20% of the enclave's territory, taking control of the border city of Rafah, pushing inland up to so-called Murak corridor that runs from the eastern edge of Gaza to the Mediterranean Sea between Rafah and the city of Khan Yunis. Israel says its forces have killed hundreds of Hamas fighters, including many senior commanders of the group. But the operation has alarmed the UN and European countries. Meanwhile, Israel on Wednesday said it would keep blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. Canada is preparing for the elections in full swing, where the main party leaders Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre face off in a fiery debate on Wednesday. The debate could prove pivotal ahead of this month's election, where Prime Minister Mark Carney's French language skills set to be tested. In a departure from the past Canadian elections, polls indicate this year's race is largely becoming a two-party contest, raising the debate and the stakes for Carney and Poilievre. Both candidates have a strong hold on current economic conditions of the country and are significantly addressing the tariff situation with the neighbor, United States. Moving on, Chinese President Xi Jinping was welcomed at the Malaysia's National Palace on Wednesday. Xi is on a highly anticipated state visit that comes as Beijing fights an escalating trade war with the United States. Xi is scheduled to hold a bilateral meeting with Malaysian Prime Minister, where the leaders are expected to sign a number of partnership deals. Xi Jinping's trip to Malaysia is part of his Southeast Asia tour that has already taken him to Vietnam and will also include Cambodia, with Beijing trying to position itself as a stable alternative to Trump's punitive tariff regime. Xi said he expected to use his visit as an opportunity to further deepen bilateral traditional friendship and strengthen political mutual trust. China has remained Malaysia's largest trading partner for 16 consecutive years. After more than 3 years of negotiations and final overnight push, countries at the World Health Organization have agreed on a historic pandemic accord aimed at avoiding a repeat of the mistakes made during the COVID crisis. Adopted on Wednesday, 32-page agreement outlines global cooperation on pandemic preparedness, prevention and response. The agreement comes amid growing threats like H5N1, bird flu, measles and mpox.
Marks a significant milestone in our shared journey toward a safer world. We celebrate the successful conclusion of negotiations on a draft pandemic agreement, completed in just 3.5 years.
India has rejected the attempts to introduce new parameters, including religion and faith, as the basis for representation in the reformed UN Security Council. New Delhi asserted that the latest attempts to include new criteria stand opposed to the accepted basis of regional representation.
First, those opposed to text-based negotiations do not seek progress on reforms. Second, an argument that an expanded and reformed Security Council would not be efficient is an attempt to stall real reforms. A reformed council with appropriate working methods and accountability mechanisms would be equipped to function effectively and deliver meaningfully on pressing global issues. Third, a consolidated model that does not cover expansion in both the permanent and non-permanent categories would not achieve the purpose of reform, further entrenching the status quo. And finally, attempts to introduce new parameters such as religion and faith as basis for representation in a reformed council runs completely counter to regional representation, which has been the accepted basis for representation in the United Nations.
On April 16, 1853, a train ran for the first time between Bori Bandar in Bombay and Thane, a journey that changed the course of India's future. Let's take a ride down the tracks of history. Here's a special report by our correspondent, Abhishek Singh.
April 16, 1853, the day that marked a turning point in India's history. On this day, the first passenger train ran between Bori Bandar in Bombay and Thane, covering a distance of nearly 33.8 kilometers. It was a defining moment that ushered India into the railway era. The train had 14 carriages and carried about 400 distinguished passengers. It was powered by 3 steam locomotives, Sahib, Sultan and Sindh. Departing at 3:30 p.m., it reached Thane in about an hour. This first ever train journey was flagged off with a 21-gun salute, a grand celebration that marked the birth of Indian Railways. Railway Minister Ashwini Vaishnav also took to social media today, calling it a historic day for Indian Railways. His message on X highlighted how a journey that began years ago has now made India a global leader in rail transport. From that humble beginning, Indian Railways has evolved into a smart, fast and eco-conscious transport system. Trains like Vande Bharat Express now offer speed and comfort, while stations in cities like Ayodhya, Bhopal and Gandhinagar have been transformed into world-class hubs. Today, ticketing is Wi-Fi enabled and paperless, and Indian Railways is aiming for net zero carbon emissions by 2030.
भारतीय रेल देश की जीवन रेखा है। आज ही के दिन पहली बार 1853 में देश की पहली रेलगाड़ी बोरीबंदर से थाने के बीच चलाई गई थी और उसकी स्मृति में आज का दिन रेल दिवस के रूप में मनाया जाता है। पूरे देशवासियों को इस शुभ अवसर पर मैं बधाई देना चाहता हूं। अपनी स्थापना काल से लेकर अब तक भारतीय रेल ने देश की एकता को मजबूत प्रदान करने में महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभाई है और साथ ही प्रतिदिन 2.5 करोड़ से 3 करोड़ लोगों को सेवाएं प्रदान की है।
Whether it's the Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train project or dedicated freight corridors, Indian Railways is drawing new lines across the map, shaping the vision of a developed India by 2047. Today, nearly 30 to 40 million people travel by train every day. What began with just 34 kilometers of track in 1853 has now become a vast network of over 68,000 kilometers. In the last 11 years, under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, Indian Railways has achieved milestone after milestone, becoming not just a mode of transport but a symbol of progress. Abhishek Singh's report for DD India.
That's all for this edition of DD India Live. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS. Scan the QR code on the screen and download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Live. Namaskar.